Hi, my name is Mark Heiss. Welcome to my shop. And what we're going to talk about today is how to get a finish on a mandolin or guitar or anything with a lacquer finish, really, to a high gloss mirror shine from a 400 level lacquer finish. Well, basically, here's what's going on. This mandolin is ready to be sanded down with a 400 grit emery cloth wet dry sandpaper, and I've already started sanding on this. And at this point, all the little spaces, gaps, holes, divots, whatever, anywhere on the mandolin need to be filled. If you have any little holes or gaps or spaces, you'll need to take a small brush or even a toothpick and just put some little lacquer in there and keep sanding it, filling it, sanding it, filling it until it's perfectly smooth. And then you're going to want to sand the whole instrument with a 400 grit paper. Until there's no shiny spots, and that'll let you know that the instrument is ready for the final, what I would call the 2 finish coats. After this is completely sanded down with the 400 grit paper and dry, then it needs to be sprayed with 2 final coats of clear lacquer. After those 2 coats, the instrument needs to sit for about 4 to 5 weeks before you start doing the final rubbing out and buffing and polishing. Okay, we're back now. The instrument's had 2 final coats of lacquer sprayed on it, and you can see it's nice and glossy, but it's not perfectly flat, nor is it anywhere near a mirror finish. It's kind of orange peel looking. So what we're going to do now is begin some wet sanding with. We'll begin with 1,000 grit emery paper, move to 1,200, and then 1,500, and then we'll start a polishing process. Now, before you do any of this, and I hope I probably should have said this sooner. I use water. Some people use mineral spirits, but I use water when I work with the emery paper. I just feel like it cuts a lot better than mineral spirits. But the danger with using water, obviously, is if there are any gaps or spaces or little cracks. If water gets in there, it'll pull the finish up. So you want to be sure that all the F-holes, in particular, have been sealed off nicely. For me, before I even put the top on the mandolin, I'll use some black lacquer from underneath and paint the edges of the F-holes black and overlap a little bit on the inside of the instrument. Also, the holes for the tuners, these are not drilled out for tuners yet. They're too small for tuners. But I make sure these holes are lacquered in real good, both in the front and in the back, because I don't want, if water gets in there, it could really just mess up your finish. So you want to be sure that everything is filled. You'll notice I haven't cut out the pocket yet for the truss rod. I'm going to cut that out after all the polishing work is done. I'll use a Dremel tool and I'll cut into that to create the truss rod pocket, because I don't want to get any moisture in there, any water in there to ruin the finish. Also, at this point, if you're building a mandolin, I hope you've already set your bridge up using your bridge sanding tool. You're going to be using sandpaper and the bridge sanding tool. You don't want to be doing this when your finish is all nice and polished and beautiful. You want it to be done before you get there, so when the instrument's finished, you'll have your bridge. It'll be all set to go, and you won't have to worry about scratching your finish. And I would really encourage you to cover this whole area with masking tape, maybe 2 layers here for where the little wheel rolls when you're doing your finish work. Also, I still have the paper towels inside the instrument, protecting it. I don't want to get any, it's not disastrous if I get moisture inside the mandolin, but I want to keep it dry, at least to this point. So I think we're ready to begin sanding with the 1000. So we're going to do that. Again, I'm using water. I'm not going to use it too liberally, because I just am really concerned about not getting any moisture around any gaps that might be present there in the F-holes. And I found that hand sanding is, it's the only way to go. I've tried doing this with random orbit sanders and other kinds of sanders. It's really hard to not get the little pigtails in here. So at this point, when you're doing your final, finish sanding, I think it's a good idea to just do it by hand. It's real smooth. You won't take off more than you need, and you'll get it down to where it'll just be really just flat, and then you'll be able to put a nice mirror finish on it. Also, just as a reminder, when you're doing your sanding on the surface of a guitar or mandolin, to try to really stay away from corners. When you're hand sanding and when you're doing some buffing work, these corners, these edges, they'll take care of themselves. And just the slightest amount of sanding seems to do a lot more on the edges than on any flat surface. So be careful of that when you're sanding. So here's what we're doing. We're sanding this down with 1000 now, trying to get it level. And you'll be able to tell if it's level by drawing it and seeing if there's any shiny spots. If there's no shiny spots, that usually means that you've gotten it down to the 1000 level. Let's take a look at this. I have a feeling it's not down yet, that'll still be kind of orange peely. I haven't been putting too much pressure on it. Yeah, you can see that. See, it's kind of smooth right through here, but you can see there's a little bit of a orange peel effect here, and still some shiny spots and stuff like that. So I need to keep on sanding till this gets completely level and flat. So it might take some elbow grease to get this to happen. You want to be careful on the fins, on the F-holes, about putting pressure on those. I don't know about you, but when I build my instruments, these get pretty thin, and for good or for bad, I don't know. I like the sound my instruments come to have, but sometimes sanding down these fins can be really precarious. So now I'm trying to get the gloss out of here, trying to get the orange peel out, trying to get it really smooth and ready for the 1200 grit paper. I've been doing this for about 15 years now, building mandolin. I don't build a lot, I build like 2, maybe 3 a year. But I've used a variety of trial and error methods to get a nice gloss finish, and I wish somebody would have told me early on how to, the most efficient and effective way to get a really nice mirror gloss finish on an instrument. And there's not just one way to do this, obviously. People have different techniques. I'm going to be using a polishing set. I'm not going to be using a buffing wheel, but a random orbit sander with some polishing material. And I found it to work really well. It gives me a consistent finish. That I've been very pleased with, that people who play my instruments seem to enjoy. I know when I first started building mandolins, I loved the building part, and I was wishing I could just hire somebody to put a finish on it, because I just hated trying to get a decent finish on the instrument. It was just so hard. But now it's quite a pleasure. I love doing the staining and the bursting. There's a lot of elbow grease that goes into this part, the sanding, but the payoff is pretty cool. It's pretty cool to have a hand-finished instrument just shine like a mirror. Probably, you don't want the lacquer to be too thick, particularly on the top. When I spray an instrument, I probably take 5 days to spray. Put one coat on in the morning, one coat on in the evening for 5 days, so about 10 layers. But then, you know, that gets sanded down pretty good. And then when you get it really flat with the 400, then it's ready for the 2 final finish coats. See how this looks. Oh yeah, this is coming along quite nicely. You can kind of see it, it's flat. See how the surface is all flat? It's not reflecting any light. So this is looking good. This doesn't look so good though. Here you can see a little bit of orange peel kind of right in there. A little bit over here, and then under the fretboard. People wonder how do you sand underneath the fretboard extension and in some of these tight spots. Let me show you a little tool I built. This is pretty primitive. It's a it's a Dremel tool with the little attachment that gets popped in there. So anyway, I took one of the rubber attachments and I put just a stick on there with some Velcro. So I've been wet sanding this for quite a while now. I've gone through different grades of paper. Right now I'm doing a final sand with 1500 grit wet emery paper. I use water. I think I said that already. If you're concerned at all about getting moisture inside any gaps or spaces or in F-holes, then use mineral spirits and you'll be safe. I just don't think mineral spirits cuts quite as well with the paper as water. So I've gone through the 1000 grit, excuse me, and go up to 1200 grit, and then the final sanding process is with the 1500. The next thing we're going to do is start the polishing process. To polish, I use a random orbit sander. Typical random orbit sanders, pretty good size. This is a small one. This is a little 3-inch random orbit sander made by a company called GRIOTS. People use these for their cars. And I use a pad on here that's called an Abralon pad, made by a company called Mirka, and I use the 4000. And this is actually a surface that can sand very gently, very fine, but it does have a grit to it. So when I first start using the 4000, I cut it down obviously to fit on here. It'll put a kind of a dull surface on here, but then after I use it a few times, then it's ready for the what I call the cutting compound. What I'll be using on the mandolin is this stuff right here, Meguiar's Ultra Cut Compound, number 105. This stuff is it's great. I'll use this with the Abralon pad. It doesn't have any silicone in it, so if you're working on a lacquer instrument, you don't have to worry about things getting contaminated at some point in the future if you want to do some repair work.